Yep, COVID. That'll be so weird someday to when there'll be. I mean, I don't know. Is there any textbook chapters on COVID? Probably, right? Like history, high school textbooks. Do high schoolers even use textbooks anymore, or is everything just on the computer? I don't know. I'm out of touch with the youth. I guess I can start introducing myself. My name's Faye. I like science. In real life, I have a bachelor's degree in biology. Cause I don't know, biology is just neat. I'm in grad school for something. I haven't 100% said what I'm studying yet because I was worried about doxing. Eventually, I'll talk more about what I'm studying and what my real life career will be. But I guess you could say I'm in grad school for something like physiology adjacent human biology. I'll talk more about it eventually. Well, okay, the plague by Faye. That's me. Warnings. I always have a little warning on my presentation. Yeah, so I do my darned best to make my content accurate. I can't guarantee it, but I do try to include my sources at the end. I try to find sources that seem at least somewhat reliable. If I say something that doesn't sound right, and some of you guys very well may have more knowledge in these subjects than me. If I make a mistake, if I say something that doesn't look right, you can tell me now. You can tell me tomorrow. Any future video I make, you can correct me, and if I say something incorrect and I mislead you guys, I'll do my best to add an addendum or whatever I need to do, because I really would like to not spread fake information. So if I make a mistake, correct me. I won't be mad. I'll be happy. So yeah, I'm talking about disease in this lecture. I don't have any real life photos. There's no photos of dead people or anything, just because I don't know how YouTube will feel about that, and I don't know if people want to see that anyways. Some of the history involves war between different countries and stuff, and I'm not trying to comment on it. I'm not trying to say this country's good, this country's bad. I try to include things that are actually facts. I'm not trying to support a specific country or belief or anything. So if I talk about war, I'm actually just trying to talk about the facts. But yay, part 1, the past. Oh, I forgot to include fun transitions on the slides. Oh well. So Black Death, what is the Black Death? And what is this? What is the significance of this ugly animal? Plague is not a specific term. I think there's various illnesses you could call the plague, because there's been a lot of diseases that have spread throughout the world. So in this video, I'm talking about one specific plague, but plague is kind of a non-specific term. It could refer to smallpox or there's a lot of different things. But the plague that most of us are familiar with when we hear the plague or Black Death, or when we think about rats running around Europe in the 1500s, that's the bubonic plague. And the bubonic plague is spread by fleas and animals, especially rodents like rats. And so this was going on for quite a long time. This was the 1300s to 1900s in Europe and Asia, probably in other parts of the world too, I would assume. It happened in waves. It had an estimated 60 to 90% death rate, so yeah, it's not a great disease to catch back then. It's still probably not a great disease to catch. We have a little bit better solutions these days. And it wiped out an estimated 1/3 to 2/3 of Europe at one point. So this is buboes. We'll talk more about what a bubo is later. It's kind of a funny word, right? But the bubonic plague. This is a bubo. That's what it looks like. I guess plague can also do this, gangrene your fingers or whatever limb rotting off. So plague doctors, are they real? What is it? So when I was reading, so that they have this whole outfit with the mask and everything, because it's supposed to be if you've ever been in a lab, maybe you've heard the term PPE or personal protective equipment. If you're in a hospital today, and you have an infectious disease, the doctor might wear those gowns that kind of cover their arms, and gloves and masks. There's different kind of masks. There's the N95s, there's the simple cloth ones. So that's all. This was kind of an early edition of that. This was what they had, because they didn't have nice N95s back then, unfortunately. in the suit. So it was meant to protect the wearer from miasma or bad air. So there was kind of a lot of different theories for the plague. Some people thought it was like cursed from God. Some people thought it was just like various things, but they did kind of, some of them did realize it was related to air. And so apparently a lot of them were not actual doctors. They were not trained physicians, and they couldn't do much for dying patients because there was not really antibiotics back then or anything. I don't think, maybe some natural remedies, but I think if you have bad plague back then, you're basically going to die from it. You don't, they can't do much for you. Some were apparently just there to count, my head's blocking, but some were just there to count the number of sick people and pretty much just perform a census. Yeah, this mask was supposed to filter air. They had a stick or a cane or whatever so they could like poke people basically. I mean, they kind of had the right idea. Like it probably, I would assume like maybe this did protect them somewhat. Like if they had gloves on and they're, they had social distancing, if they have a stick. More recent history, what's going on with the plague nowadays? Or I guess the past 100 years. India developed a vaccine for the plague in 1893. By the 1930s, the plague was basically, the epidemic, meaning a widespread plague, was basically a thing of the past. And I think this was meant to say modern antibiotics brought death rate to about 11%, that's fairly good compared to the 60 to 90%. Yeah, the plague is still exists. The bacteria is still out there. People still catch the plague. It's just we have a lot better solutions for it these days. Fun fact. So I guess in Venice, Italy, they had ships. When the ships landed, they had to quarantine for 40 days. So I think Venice kind of invented the quarantine. And so I didn't know this. The word quarantine comes from the Italian word for 40. Quaranta. Sorry, that's probably pronounced wrong. I don't speak Italian, but part 2, the present. So what is the biology of the plague? Caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I don't know, maybe. It still exists in Western USA, some parts of Africa and Asia. Probably other places too. Theoretically, it could probably exist anywhere, but 3 main types of plague according to the CDC, which is a lot of my information on the biology comes from the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, I think, but it's a USA agency. So there's 3 types of plague that we'll learn about, but I think most of them will start with things like fever, chills, headache, weakness, because that's just what a lot of illnesses are going to have, basically. So it doesn't, if someone has like fever or a headache, that doesn't really tell you much until they start getting more symptoms. So type number 1, bubonic plague. So this is the main kind of plague that people think about. This was the most widespread one, I think. So what are buboes? So I've heard the word bubonic, but I don't think I knew what buboes was until a few years ago. So that's swollen lymph nodes. And if you don't know, lymph nodes, that's small structures throughout the body that have white blood cells and help fight off infection. And they like filter something called lymph, which is, I think it's basically sampling our whole body to look for infection. And so this one is spread by rodents and fleas. So someone mentioned marmots. I think a lot of people, when they think about the plague, at least for me, I kind of picture rats running through like sewers and medieval, it's the 1500s, medieval, whatever, like rats running through Europe and like sewers, and then rats jumping on ships. So this is, I showed this earlier, I think, but that's the buboes. But yes, this is lymph nodes. We kind of have these like nodes throughout our bodies, and they have white blood cells to help fight off infection. And I think they're basically kind of just sampling what's going through our body to figure out where the infections are and how to fight it, So they're just everywhere. And if they become swollen and infected, it'll look like, buboes. Or sometimes if you're sick, like I think you'll have a little bit of swelling in your neck, but it's not going to look like this. For it to look like this, you have to be pretty sick. But I don't know, maybe next time you're sick, you can try feeling your neck and see if you can feel your lymph nodes get a little bit like swollen. Yep, they're there to keep us healthy and safe and whatever, but if they get swollen, it's not going to be so great. Or if they get that bad, I mean. And so here's just, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but basically it's just fleas will spread it, rodents will spread it, I guess like other animals can have it too, like dogs and cats, I think. Like you can get it from your oh god. So I'm just looking at this diagram. This is so sad. It's like this woman's hugging her dog, and I guess the dog's gonna give her the plague. But yeah, I guess for whatever reason it's in the western United States. Maybe it's the weather there or something. I don't know, but it's great. But yeah, you could get it from rodents, animals. I think for this one, the plague, like this plague is not really gonna spread between humans, I guess, unless you're like touching their buboes or their fluids, I think. But mostly I think it's the ticks. Yeah, so more info on the bubonic plague, which is the famous one. So, lo and behold, the bubonic plague involves buboes, which we just learned. It's a big plague people think of. Back in the day, they would try to lance the buboes or like cut into them and drain them. Apparently, this was not helpful and possibly made the situation worse. So, this is a fantastic artistic representation of the plague. Okay. Type number 2, septicemic plague. What is sepsis? Yeah, so basically, sepsis is, you don't need to understand this whole scale, but sepsis is kind of like when your body is like overreacting to an illness and it's kind of making you more ill. So it's like your blood pressure's messed up, like your temperature's off, like you have a really high fever or you're really cold. Your heart rate is going out of control. You either have like a ton of white blood cells or like no white blood cells. So a lot of like sepsis isn't a disease itself. It's kind of just like the body's response to disease. So a lot of diseases, I think basically most infections could cause sepsis as far as I know. Like you could probably get COVID sepsis. You can get, I don't know, like flu sepsis if you're sick enough, probably. Oh yeah, and this is like gangrene, I guess, like ischemic gangrene. Maybe it's like your skin is not getting blood, so it's just rotting basically. So this could happen on its own, or this could just be like bubonic plague, but then you have bubonic plague, but then you enter sepsis, like your blood pressure and your heart and your white blood cells go out of control. Yes, this is necrosis. Maybe you've heard of necrosis. Type 3, pneumonic plague. I think most people have heard of pneumonia, but pneumonia is an infection of the lungs. Like, it could basically be any infection of the lungs, like a COVID pneumonia, flu pneumonia, whatever. This would cause shortness of breath, cough, chest pain. You might cough up blood or mucus. And this one's the most serious kind, and the bubonic plague is spread through rodents and fleas, but this one can actually be spread from person to person, kind of like COVID. People can cough on each other. I don't know if they could like cough on a doorknob or something and spread it, because I think for different illnesses that's different. Unfortunate. Yeah, I think COVID actually can't really stay on surfaces that well, right? But I don't know about this. I'm not sure. Yeah, and so even if you've never seen an X-ray, it's like, oh, okay, there's like a lot of something going on here that's not looking good. So pneumonia. Oh yeah, here's a nice diagram that shows everything. So bubonic plague is rodents, fleas, humans. They're septicemic, so this one can be spread through like breaks in your skin, I guess. And there's also pneumonic, human to human air droplets. So delightful. That's the 3 main types of plague. The plague be treated. Yes, we have some antibiotics to use on Y. pestis, Yersinia pestis. So those are some antibiotics: aminoglycosides, fluoroquinolones, tetracyclines. I didn't explain. I actually love antibiotics. I have some knowledge on pharmacy, but it's okay if you don't know what those are. I can make another stream and talk about antibiotics. Yeah, basically, long story short, we have some good antibiotics that could fight it off. Part 3, the future. Yeah, which is the future? Okay, so here's a quote from the CDC. My head's slightly blocking it, but I'll read this to you. Y. pestis is categorized as a Tier 1 bioterrorism select agent, the highest risk category of biologic agents and toxins with the potential to pose a severe threat to public health and safety. This designation is due in part to its low infectious dose, high case fatality rate in untreated infection, and history of use as an agent of bioterrorism. The most concerning scenario for a bioterrorist attack involves dispersing Y. pestis into the air, leading to primary pneumonic plague among exposed persons. The World Health Organization has estimated that a release of 50 kilograms of Y. pestis into the air over a city of 5 million persons could result in 150,000 cases of pneumonic plague and 36,000 deaths. The past uses of plague as a bioterrorist. So apparently in the 14th century, a Turkish army catapulted corpses infected with the plague over a gated wall into enemy territory. Delightful. During World War II, apparently Japan dropped porcelain bombs filled with plague fleas into China. And in the 1980s, Russia experimented with genetically modifying the plague. Actually, I have some more information on that in a second. We'll talk about. Most people could probably go into their kitchen and create like a chemical weapon, right? Like, it's very easy to gain access to chemicals and create weapons. Please don't do this. I'm not encouraging anyone to do this, but yeah, it's like easier to create. Basically, almost anyone could create a chemical weapon, right? But then creating a biological weapon is much more hard. It's hard to control. You have to keep it alive and whatever. Yeah, here's some other cases of bioterrorism that they're not the plague. They're not Yersinia pestis, but I thought it was interesting. There's a terrorist group, which I think still exists in Japan and throughout the world on some small level, but this was in the early 90s. This group, Aum Shinrikyo, which is a Japanese cult, they tried to spray aerosolized anthrax from trucks, and they were apparently driving these trucks around areas with people they did not like, including a U.S. naval base, an airport, and the headquarters of a rival religious group, and they were driving around in trucks and spraying aerosolized anthrax. So that's fantastic. Oh yeah, this isn't the U.S. anthrax case though. I think this is, at least if you live in the U.S., it's pretty well known. In the 2000s, someone was mailing anthrax, and I watched a whole documentary on this like a few years ago. Apparently, no one's 100% certain what happened, because I think this man was claiming his innocence, and I think he committed suicide, unfortunately. But as far as they've researched, it was a U.S. Army scientist, and he mailed out envelopes containing anthrax, and he was hypothesized to have done this to ensure his anthrax research remained prioritized. So yeah, I think this, as far as we know, I don't think anyone 100% knows the story, but as far as they think, this was a researcher researching anthrax, and I think there was going to be like budget cuts to his department or something, and he didn't want that. So apparently he created this big thing to like encourage more anthrax research. Oh yeah, so I included this is the man who was the director of the Soviet Union's biological weapons program from 1988 to 1992, who defected to the USA. So a lot of these questions are not specifically about the plague. They're just about his experience with like bioterrorism in general. Yeah, he did research. They did research on like various diseases. So this isn't specific to the plague, but I thought it was really interesting, so I included it. So this is an interview from PBS. I actually don't know the date of this interview. I couldn't find a date on the website, but as far as I know, PBS is pretty like legitimate in regards to interviews and everything. So I just included some of his quotes because I thought it was very interesting. So, interviewer said, during the process of production in the Soviet Union's program, how many tons of biological warfare agents were storehoused? And his answer was the Soviet Union has two main directorates responsible for developing and manufacturing biological weapons. Biological weapons were stored at the Minister of Defense facilities. For example, the Kirov facility was responsible for storing plague, about 20 tons of plague. The Zagorsk facility was responsible for storing smallpox biological weapons, about 20 tons as well. And the Ekaterinburg facility was responsible for continuous manufacturing of anthrax biological weapons. The amount of this weapon produced was hundreds of tons. Was it assumed that before the weapon would be used, the Russian people would be vaccinated to protect them against blowback from people who traveled with it? And he said, in my opinion, nobody cared what would happen to the Russians because this weapon would be used just in case of, according to Soviet Union's concept, a total war. And when we're talking about total war, of course, nobody would consider the several hundred thousands of dead Russians. The interviewer said, why was research done to genetically alter smallpox? And the director's answer was, why was it necessary to develop a 100 megaton bomb when the United States and the Soviet Union had 10, 20, 50 megaton bombs? This was just logic of developing weapons, you know? If you've got a weapon, your next step is to develop a more sophisticated weapon. Smallpox is a fine weapon, but it could be more fine just by adding some foreign genes. In this case, I'm asking the scientific community here in the United States and the world, just watch such works very carefully because in many cases, these works are conducted in, I call them dark zones. We cannot say when we look at one another's work, what is the real purpose of this work? This could be used for developing new agents, for developing new weapons. This is a very sensitive area and situation. We need to be very careful and cautious. When I was researching this, it's kind of like when you develop these science facilities that are researching weapons or bioterrorism or whatever, it's kind of a thin line between like, oh, this is a defensive agency versus like, oh, we are developing a weapon. Because I think the United States had a bioterrorism like research facility that was developing bioterrorism weapons at one point. Correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we had like a bioterrorism developing facility. But then eventually they're like, oh, well, this is a defensive facility now. We're not developing weapons, we're just researching them. But then it's kind of a fine line because it's like, well, okay, what if, if you're studying how to defend something, like you're also kind of studying how to create it in a way. So it's kind of a thin line. I guess any country could be like, oh, well, we're just researching the nuclear bomb so we can understand the safety of it. We aren't, making a bomb. We just want to understand the safety. So you could do the same thing with bioterrorism. Like, oh, we're just genetically altering it so we can defend ourselves from it. We're not genetically altering it so we can, deploy it. So it's kind of very ethical discussion that I don't have the answer to. Okay, next question was, how is a bioagent created and turned into a weaponized dust form? How easy is it to create a weaponized biological agent? He said, it's a long technological process. If we're talking about sophisticated weapons, it's quite difficult. If we're talking about genetically altered agents, it's quite difficult. Regular, ordinary terrorists wouldn't do this and cannot do this. But if we're talking about some primitive form of biological weapons capable of killing thousands of people, this is not very difficult. And how would it be done? And he says a lot of ways. For each weapon, a technique to manufacture would be different. In many cases, we are talking about culture collections, just how to get this bacteria or virus from culture collections. In many cases, unfortunately, it's not a necessity. A lot of agents can be isolated from nature. And if one or another person, one or another group has knowledge how to do this work, how to transform bacteria and viruses into weapons, even primitive weapons, they could do this without significant difficulties. So yeah, that seems like what he's saying. Like, it's if you have the knowledge on how to do it, like if you have a huge factory like they did in Russia and huge warehouses, like they can do it. But and for like smaller terrorist groups, it'd be difficult. In regards to chemical weapons, like most of us have dangerous chemicals in our house. Like I have drain cleaner like by my sinks. A lot of people have like bleach wipes and just various, like, if most people have things in their home that they could use as a weapon. Okay, telling me just the basics, what would you have to do? This group has to know several main points and techniques. How to isolate agent, how to cultivate it, how to concentrate, how to dry, how to mill, and how to aerosolize. If they know this, it wouldn't be a problem. Yeah, why not use bioterrorism? Aside from the reasons I mentioned, like it's probably just easier to use a chemical weapon or drop a bomb. There's also retaliation. Like, if one country drops the plague on another, there's bad things are probably gonna happen. Yeah, so that was my presentation. Oh, look how large I am. This is my science, sciencemuseum.org.uk, CDC, Montana State University, BC Medical Journal, the PBS interview with Dr. Olibikov, LA Times, Nuclear Threat Initiative, various resources. I guess you could say that like biological weapons could be used covertly or whatever, but it's like, I think if plague just suddenly started appearing in New York City or Washington, D.C., I think people would raise some questions. But yeah, here's thank you, and here's some fan art from someone on Reddit, Moot from 4chan. It's so cute. Look at it. I love fan art. Yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoyed the presentation. I hope people who have knowledge of this topic, I hope you felt like it was accurate. And I hope you feel like you learned something. At the end of the day, if you feel like you learned one new thing, I think that's enough for me. That's awesome. So